He stormed into court to end his marriage until his wife walked in holding 2 newborns with his eyes. The judge asked one question that froze his blood. "Did you know they were yours?" He didn't. And what happened next, no amount of money could fix. If you believe no success is worth losing the people who love you, hit subscribe. Cold hearts like Ethan's won't. Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. Today was supposed to be simple. Sign the papers, end the marriage, move on. But nothing about Elizabeth had ever been simple. His lawyer, Marcus, struggled to keep pace, his shorter legs working double time against Ethan's long strides. "Remember," Marcus muttered under his breath. "No emotional responses. We've structured this settlement generously. She gets the house in Connecticut, monthly alimony, and—" "I know what she gets." Ethan cut him off, his voice sharp as broken glass. What she didn't get was him, his time, his attention, his love. And that, he reminded himself, was exactly why they were here. The hallway stretched before them, fluorescent lights humming overhead, casting everything in that particular shade of institutional coldness that made life feel temporary. Other couples waited on benches, some holding hands, some sitting at opposite ends, eyes fixed on anywhere but each other. Ethan had never imagined he'd become one of them, another statistic, another failed promise. He had met Elizabeth Alexander 6 years ago at a charity gala, back when his company was just beginning to explode, back when he still had time for things like dancing and laughter and the way her green eyes lit up when she talked about opening her own art gallery someday. She was 20 then, a college senior with paint-stained fingers and dreams bigger than his bank account. He was 29. Hungry for success, convinced he could have both, the empire and the girl. He'd been wrong. Somewhere between the 3rd acquisition and the 5th business trip, Elizabeth had stopped waiting up for him. The dinners grew cold. The conversations grew shorter. The space between them in bed grew wider until one morning he woke up and realized he was sleeping next to a stranger who still wore his ring. "Courtroom 3B, Marcus announced, pointing to a door at the end of the hall. Ethan's hand tightened around his briefcase handle. Through the narrow window in the door, he could see the judge already seated, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and the tired expression of someone who'd watched too many marriages crumble. This was it. The end. He pushed the door open. The courtroom was smaller than he expected, more intimate. Wooden benches lined both sides. A witness stand sat empty to the left, and the judge's bench loomed ahead like an altar of endings. The air smelled of old books and furniture polish, of decisions made and regrets sealed in legal documents. Ethan took his seat at the plaintiff's table, Marcus sliding in beside him, already arranging papers with practiced efficiency. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second bringing him closer to freedom, or so he'd been telling himself for months. "She's late," Marcus whispered, checking his watch. Typical. But Ethan knew better. Elizabeth was never late. She was precise, punctual, the kind of woman who showed up 15 minutes early to everything because she hated making people wait. If she wasn't here yet, something was wrong. The judge cleared his throat. "We're scheduled for the Alexander divorce proceedings. Is the respondent present?" Marcus stood. "Your Honor, Mrs. Alexander was informed of today's—" The door at the back of the courtroom creaked open. Every head turned, and Ethan's world stopped spinning. Elizabeth stood in the doorway, but she wasn't alone. Her arms, both of them, cradled bundles wrapped in soft blue blankets. 2 bundles. 2 tiny faces peeking out, eyes closed in sleep, perfect and small and impossible. Twins. The word didn't even fully form in Ethan's mind before his body reacted, his breath catching, his hands gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. Elizabeth's eyes found his across the courtroom, and in them he saw everything he'd lost: fear, exhaustion, love, and something else he couldn't name. She looked different, thinner. Her auburn hair, once always perfectly styled, was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry except the wedding ring she still wore, a detail that hit him harder than any of her lawyer's demands ever had. "I'm sorry, Your Honor," Elizabeth said softly, her voice carrying the same gentle strength he remembered from their wedding vows. "The sitter canceled last minute. I had no choice." She moved carefully down the aisle, each step measured, protective, the weight of 2 lives balanced in her arms. She didn't look at Ethan again, but he couldn't look away from her, from them. The judge's expression softened. "Mrs. Alexander, were the children born during the marriage?" "Yes, Your Honor." Her voice wavered just slightly. 4 months ago. 4 months. The math hit Ethan like a physical blow. 4 months ago, he'd been in Dubai closing a deal. 4 months ago, Elizabeth had been, in labor? In a hospital? Alone? His lawyer leaned close. "Did you know about this?" Ethan's throat felt like sandpaper. He tried to remember. Had she told him? Had there been a call he'd ignored, an email buried under 100 others, a message lost in the chaos of his ambition? "Mr. Alexander?" The judge's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. "Were you aware of the children's birth?" The courtroom waited. Elizabeth waited, her eyes now fixed on the babies as if shielding them from his answer. Ethan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Because the truth was too shameful to speak, too painful to admit. He hadn't known because he hadn't cared enough to ask. One of the twins, the one in Elizabeth's left arm, stirred and made a small sound, not quite a cry, just a gentle announcement of existence. The sound pierced through every defense Ethan had built around his heart. His children. His sons. How had he not known? Elizabeth adjusted her hold, swaying slightly in that universal motion of mothers comforting their babies, and Ethan saw the dark circles under her eyes, the way her shoulders curved inward from exhaustion, the wedding ring that looked too loose on her finger now. She'd done this alone. All of it. The pregnancy, the birth, 4 months of sleepless nights and endless days while he'd been, where? Signing contracts, shaking hands, building towers of glass and steel while his real home crumbled. "Mr. Alexander," the judge repeated more firmly now, "I asked you a question." Ethan forced himself to stand, his legs unsteady. He started, then stopped. What could he say? That he'd been too busy, too focused on success, too selfish to notice his wife was carrying his children? "No, Your Honor," he finally whispered. "I wasn't aware." The admission hung in the air like smoke. Marcus shifted uncomfortably beside him, shuffling papers that suddenly seemed meaningless. The settlement they'd crafted, the division of assets, the carefully calculated alimony, none of it had accounted for this. For them. Elizabeth finally looked at him then, really looked at him, and Ethan saw something break behind her eyes. Not anger. Worse, disappointment that had settled into acceptance. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "can we proceed? I need to feed them soon." Feed them. Such a simple statement, but it carried the weight of everything Ethan had missed. Feedings and changings and first smiles and midnight cries. A whole world of moments that had happened without him. The judge removed his glasses, cleaning them slowly. "This changes the nature of the proceedings. Child custody and support will need to be addressed." "I'm not asking for anything beyond what's already proposed," Elizabeth said quickly. "He can have his freedom. I need to take care of my children." My children. Not our children. My children. And there it was, the final truth. She'd already written him out of the story. He wasn't a father to these boys. He was a signature on a divorce decree, a name on a check, a memory of what could have been. Ethan sat back down, but his eyes never left the twins. The one on the right had opened his eyes now, blinking in the fluorescent light, and Ethan felt his chest constrict. Those eyes. Even from across the room he could see they were gray, The same shade as his own, the same shade as his father's. His bloodline, his legacy, not in buildings or bank accounts, but in these two tiny humans who didn't even know his name. The second twin yawned, a movement so small and perfect it seemed impossible, and something inside Ethan cracked wide open. Not just guilt, something deeper. Recognition. Connection. The sudden, overwhelming understanding that everything he'd built meant nothing compared to what he was about to lose. "Your Honor," Ethan heard himself say, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't control anymore. I need a moment." The judge nodded. "We'll take a brief recess." But Ethan didn't move toward the door. Instead, he turned to Elizabeth, who was already standing, preparing to leave, to take his sons and disappear into a life he'd never be part of. "Elizabeth," he said, and her name on his lips felt foreign after months of silence between them. She paused, her back still to him, her whole body tense. "Please," he added, and the word cost him everything. "Please don't go." The courtroom held its breath. Slowly, so slowly, Elizabeth turned to face him. Tears glistened in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "Why, Ethan? Why should I stay?" And he had no answer, no excuse, no explanation that could bridge the canyon of his failures. All he had was the truth. "Because," he whispered, "I was wrong. About everything." The words fell into the space between them like stones into deep water, creating ripples that couldn't be taken back. Elizabeth stood frozen, the twins cradled against her chest, her eyes searching his face for something, sincerity maybe, or proof that this wasn't just another performance from a man who'd mastered the art of convincing people to believe in him. "Wrong about what exactly?" she asked, and her voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "Wrong about missing the ultrasounds? Wrong about not answering when I called you from the hospital? Wrong about choosing a merger over our marriage? Which part, Ethan?" Each question was an accusation, each one deserved. Marcus touched his elbow, a warning. "Ethan, this isn't the time." "Get out," Ethan said, not looking at his lawyer. "What?" "I said get out." Ethan's voice was quiet but absolute. "I need to talk to my wife. Alone." Marcus hesitated, then gathered his papers with sharp, frustrated movements. "You're making a mistake," he muttered as he passed, but Ethan didn't care anymore about mistakes. He'd already made the biggest one of his life. The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Alexander, this is highly irregular." "Your Honor," Ethan said, finally tearing his eyes from Elizabeth to address the bench. "I'm asking for time. Just time. To talk to her. Please." The judge studied him for a long moment, then looked at Elizabeth. "Mrs. Alexander, this is your choice." Elizabeth's grip tightened on the twins. One of them made a small sound, a coo that seemed impossibly loud in the silent courtroom. She looked down at her sons, then back at Ethan, and something in her expression shifted, not softening exactly, but opening slightly like a door left barely ajar. 5 minutes, she said. "That's all you get." The judge nodded and stood. "I'll be in chambers. Bailiff, give them the room." Within moments, they were alone. Just Ethan and Elizabeth and the two tiny lives between them. The silence felt different now, heavier, more honest. Ethan moved slowly around the table, careful not to startle her, not to push too hard too fast. He'd spent years in negotiations, reading people, knowing when to advance and when to retreat. But this wasn't business. This was survival. He stopped a few feet away from her, close enough to see the fine details he'd forgotten. The small scar on her left eyebrow from when she'd fallen off her bike as a child, the way her nose crinkled slightly when she was trying not to cry, the exact shade of her eyes, green like sea glass, like something precious found after a storm. "I got the call," he said quietly. "From the hospital. 4 months ago." Elizabeth's jaw tightened. "I know you did. They told me someone answered. My assistant took it. She, She put it in my calendar as a personal matter to address later. He laughed, but there was no humor in it, only bitter self-awareness. I was in a meeting about buying another building. Another empty building in a city full of them. So you knew. It wasn't a question. I knew you'd called. I knew it was marked urgent, and His voice broke. I told myself I'd call back after the meeting, then after the dinner with investors, then after the flight, and then days became weeks, and I convinced myself that if it was really important, you'd call again. I did call again, Elizabeth whispered, 17 times. The number hit him like a fist. 17 times she'd reached out. 17 times he'd chosen to ignore her. I know, he said, and the admission felt like swallowing glass. I saw them. Every call, every voicemail. I couldn't. I didn't know how to face what I'd become, the man who'd forgotten how to come home. One of the twins began to fuss, a soft mewling sound that made Elizabeth shift her weight, bouncing gently. The movement was so natural, so practiced, and Ethan realized with a sharp pang that she'd learned this alone, figured out how to comfort them alone, become a mother in the space where he should have been a father. Do you know their names? Elizabeth asked suddenly. The question stopped him cold. Names. Of course they had names. 4 months old, and he didn't even know what she'd called them. No, he admitted, the shame burning through him. I don't. Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears that finally spilled over, tracking down her cheeks in silent streams. James, she said, lifting her left arm slightly. And Henry. She lifted her right. James has your grandmother's eyes, and Henry has your smile, even though he's only smiled twice, and you weren't there to see it. James. Henry. His sons had names, had smiles, had lived 4 months of life while he'd been building his empire of nothing. Elizabeth. Do you know what it was like? She interrupted, her voice shaking now, all the control she'd been holding on to fracturing. Going into labor alone. Lying in that hospital bed for 18 hours thinking maybe this time you'd come. The nurses kept asking if someone was coming, if I'd called anyone, and I kept saying yes, my husband knows he'll be here. But you never came, Ethan, you never came. Each word was a knife, precise and deserved. I held them for the first time by myself. I cried when I saw them and there was no one to share it with. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do, how to feed 2 babies at once, how to change them, how to stop them from crying. And I was so tired, so scared, and the only person I wanted was you, and you were in Dubai closing a deal on another hotel. I'm sorry. The words felt pathetically inadequate. God, Elizabeth, I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't give me back those moments, she said, her voice rising. Sorry doesn't change the fact that when they ask about their father someday, I'll have to tell them he chose money over meeting them, that he cared more about buildings than the family growing inside our home. James started to cry then, a full-throated wail that made Elizabeth wince. She tried to rock him, but with both babies in her arms, the movement was awkward, strained. Ethan saw her struggling, and something instinctive took over. Let me, he said, reaching out. No. Elizabeth turned slightly away, protective. Please, Elizabeth, please, let me help. Let me just hold him. She looked at him, really looked at him, and Ethan saw the war playing out behind her eyes, the desire to let him in fighting against the fear of being disappointed again. You'll support his head, she finally said, her voice brittle. Newborns can't. They need you to support their head and neck. Okay, Ethan said, his hands trembling as he reached out. Elizabeth carefully transferred James into his arms, and the moment his son's weight settled against his chest, Ethan's entire world realigned. The baby was so small, impossibly small, warm and solid and real in a way that made every board meeting, every contract, every dollar in his bank account feel like vapor. James stopped crying almost immediately, his gray eyes, his grandmother's eyes, blinking up at Ethan with an expression that seemed almost curious. One tiny hand escaped the blanket and grasped at air before finding Ethan's finger and holding on with surprising strength. The grip of that small hand shattered the last of Ethan's defenses. "Hi," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Hi, James. I'm your dad." The words sounded foreign, unearned, but James just blinked at him, and Ethan felt tears burning down his face. Tears he didn't try to stop. Elizabeth watched them, her own tears still falling. Henry quiet now in her arms. "You can't just hold him once and think it fixes everything," she said softly. "You can't charm your way through this like a business deal." "I know," Ethan said, unable to look away from James. "I know I can't. But Elizabeth, I want to try. Not because I think I deserve it. I know I don't. But because they deserve better than a father who was too proud to admit he'd lost his way." He finally looked up at her, at the woman he'd married, the woman he'd failed, the woman who'd somehow found the strength to love him and let him go. "I built everything wrong," he said. "Every choice, every priority. I thought success meant towers with my name on them, but I was just building monuments to my own emptiness. And you tried to tell me. God, you tried so many times and I didn't listen. I didn't want to hear that I was losing the only thing that mattered." "Why now?" Elizabeth asked, her voice barely audible. "Why does it matter now when it didn't matter then?" "Because I saw them," Ethan whispered. "Because I'm holding him and I can feel his heartbeat and I finally understand what I've been missing. It's not about the buildings or the money or the success, it's this. It's him. It's Henry. It's you. It's coming home to something real instead of sleeping in hotel rooms that all look the same." James yawned, a tiny, perfect gesture, and nestled closer to Ethan's chest, as if he belonged there, as if he knew. "I don't know if I can believe you," Elizabeth said, but her voice wavered. "You've promised before, you've said you'd change, you'd be home more, you'd make time, and then a call would come and you'd leave and I'd be alone again." "I know." Ethan's voice was thick with emotion. "I know my promises haven't meant anything. But Elizabeth, I'm not asking you to believe my words. I'm asking you to let me prove it with my actions. Let me show up. Let me be there for their next feeding, their next doctor's appointment, the next time they cry at 3 a.m. "Ethan, I'll step back from the company. I'll sell it if I have to. None of it matters without this." He looked down at James, then back at Elizabeth. "Without you, without them, I've been chasing the wrong things, and I'm standing here with everything I've ever really wanted, and I'm terrified that I've realized it too late." Henry stirred in Elizabeth's arms, making small sounds. She looked exhausted, worn thin by months of doing everything alone. And Ethan saw with painful clarity what his ambition had cost her, not just the loneliness, but her dreams too. The art gallery she'd wanted to open. The life she'd planned. All of it sacrificed to his relentless pursuit of more. "I'm going to feed them," Elizabeth said quietly. You can stay if you want." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even acceptance. But it was a crack in the wall and Ethan would take it. "I want to," he said. She moved to one of the benches and sat down, settling Henry in the crook of her arm, while managing to pull a bottle from the bag she'd somehow carried along with 2 babies. Ethan watched, still holding James, marveling at her efficiency, at how she'd learned to manage alone. "There's another bottle," she said, nodding toward the bag. "If you want to feed James." His hands shook as he retrieved it as he settled onto the bench beside her, careful to maintain distance but close enough to be present. He'd negotiated million-dollar deals with steady hands, but feeding his own son felt like the most important, most terrifying thing he'd ever done. Elizabeth guided him, showing him the angle, the way to test the temperature, the gentle pressure needed. And as James began to eat, his small sounds of contentment filling the quiet courtroom, Ethan felt something shift inside him, something fundamental and irreversible. This was what mattered. This moment. This connection. I used to imagine this, Elizabeth said softly, watching her son eat. When I was pregnant, I'd picture us doing this together, taking turns with night feedings, figuring out parenthood as a team. I'd fall asleep imagining you holding them, singing to them the way your mother said you used to sing in the car. I don't deserve those images, Ethan said. No, she agreed. You don't. But they deserve a father who shows up. Not just today. Not just because you saw them and felt guilty. They deserve someone who chooses them every single day, even when it's hard, even when it's boring, even when there's a business deal that seems more exciting. I want to be that person, Ethan said. I know I haven't been, but I want to try. They sat in silence for a while, just the soft sounds of the twins eating, the clock ticking on the wall, the world outside continuing without them. Elizabeth finished feeding Henry and began to burp him, the practiced motion of someone who'd done this 100 times. Ethan watched, trying to memorize every detail, every technique, all the things he should have learned months ago. When James is done, you pat his back gently like this, she instructed, demonstrating with Henry. Not too hard, just enough. Ethan nodded, focused completely on his son, on being present in this one moment he never thought he'd have. When James finished, Ethan carefully lifted him to his shoulder, mimicking Elizabeth's movements. The small burp that followed made him smile, a genuine expression that felt strange on his face after months of corporate masks. Elizabeth, he said quietly, I know I can't erase the past 4 months. I can't give you back what I took. But if you give me a chance, just one chance, I swear I'll spend every day proving that I've changed. Not with words, with actions. She looked at him, her green eyes still guarded but something softening in them. The papers are still sitting on that table, she said. We came here to end this. I know. Ethan's voice was steady now, certain. But maybe we came here to save it. Maybe I needed to see them, to hold him, to understand what I was about to lose forever. One chance, Elizabeth whispered, and Ethan's heart stopped. But Ethan, if you leave again, if you choose the company over us even once, I won't give you another. They deserve better than half a father. They'll have all of me, he promised. And this time he meant it with every fiber of his being. Starting right now. The judge returned, his expression curious as he took in the scene before him, Ethan and Elizabeth sitting side by side, each holding a baby, looking less like two people ending a marriage and more like a family trying to begin again. Have we reached a decision? The judge asked. Ethan stood carefully, still cradling James. Your Honor, I'd like to request a continuance. My wife and I, we need more time. Elizabeth stood too, and for the first time since she'd walked through that door, she looked at Ethan without walls between them. We need time, she confirmed softly. The judge smiled, a rare expression in a room used to endings. Continuance granted, 60 days. Use them wisely, Mr. Alexander. As they walked out of the courtroom together, James sleeping against Ethan's chest, and Henry content in Elizabeth's arms, Ethan realized something profound. He'd entered that courthouse as a millionaire ready to sign away his past. He was leaving as a father, a husband, a man who'd finally understood that the greatest fortune wasn't built with money. Only the proud think money can replace love. If you're not one of them, like this video right now, it was built with love, with presence, with choosing to show up every single day. Comment, love over money. If you believe family is the real wealth, because the greedy ones won't. And for the first time in years, Ethan Alexander felt truly rich.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.